Greetings everyone, I am the Mad Scientist, aka Dr. J. Let's talk about balancing, specifically balancing pertaining to League of Legends. It's hard not to talk about it, since that how well balanced something is can have the largest impact on how good a game actually is. The concept and execution can be great, but bad balancing can ruin a game. Since the League of Legends is one of the most popular games in the world, that would suggest it's also fairly balanced, but ask anyone in the community or at Riot, and they will say that this game does have some imbalances in it, or is just downright broken. Granted, there is bound to be some kind of imbalance with a game as complex as this, but beyond that, why is it that we stay with this game? I feel that question can be answered with a simple concept with powerful implications: perfect imbalance. If you aren't familiar with extra credits, or haven't seen this particular video, go click the annotation or the link in the description and then come back. Much of what I'll be talking about is based off of the ideas presented in that video. If you're lazy, here's a basic rundown. The idea is just how it sounds. From the onset, you craft slight imbalances into your system. Nothing overt or ridiculous, but subtle ones that aren't always obvious. The idea is that a game becomes much more engaging and more interesting as players try and figure out how to gain a slight advantage within that system. The fact that the metagame exists is evidence of this in action. The laning positions themselves haven't meaningfully changed in over 2 years, but the champions who are popular in each role, when they are popular and why, are all evidence of perfect imbalance in action. In many cases, this progression isn't necessarily caused by a balance change by Riot, but only reinforced by it. At the beginning of Season 3, Black Cleaver rose to popularity because it gave a ton of armor shred, allowing AD casters to dominate the meta. Even after the major imbalance surrounding that item was taken care of, it was still seen as powerful. In order to work around it, health stacking became the norm, in order to negate the usefulness of armor shred as a statistic. It was League of Warmonks for a while, but that was a trend that wasn't to last forever. Blade of the Ruined King, which does extra damage based on a percentage of the enemy's max health, arose as a hard counter to health stacking. This is where the popularity of champions who either do percentage health damage or build Blade of the Ruined King came from, such as Vayne, Varus, and Elise. With that now on the scene, there were 2 ways devised to deal with it. One of these was to buy armor again, with Randuin's Omen becoming the most popular tank item. Another one was to find a champion that could easily kill the carry before they could get that damage off, which led to the rise of assassins like Fizz and Kassadin. Those who stay ahead or within the popularity curve are the ones who tend to do best, and the change in popularity is what makes the game interesting and much more engaging. Part of the reason why it's never the same game twice is based on the fact that perfect imbalance is built into the system. Even if you don't play what is popular, the fact that a certain element is popular can have sweeping effects on the balancing and the perception of what is balance. The best example I have of this stems from my own experience with the game, specifically when I was climbing up into and through gold for the first time. I didn't play assassins, I didn't play the powerful AD carries, and though I tried to do well with aggressive junglers, it didn't always work out. The champion that got me into and through gold is one of the least popular champions for the support role, Soraka. While you're checking my logging to make sure I'm not trolling, let me explain why this works so well and why, with regard to Season 3, Soraka netted me more elo than any other champion. First and foremost, Dorn's Blade was the most popular starting item for AD carries. This is still the case at the time of recording, but back then you couldn't get a health potion along with it. It had more sustain than it once did, but in my experience climbing into gold, that sustain meant nothing if you stepped a little too far forward and got knocked to half your health. You might get 5 health back from Dorn's Blade, or maybe even 10 health if you run lifesteal quints, but you'll take 50 damage from a champion's auto attack, or potentially get comboed to death. Because of this, whenever I tried to play a champion that didn't have a heal, I had to hope and pray that whatever I tried to do in lane didn't cause my AD carry to take too much damage. Being in silver and low gold, one does not always have much faith in their AD carry's ability to not take too much damage. However, Soraka was able to both abuse and facilitate Dorn's Blade. With her, I couldn't outdamage the AD carry, but I could outlast them. They might do 100 damage to me and I might do 50 to them, but my damage would stick because I could heal the pain back. With some practice, I could throw this against any enemy lane combo and they wouldn't be able to stop me unless they could kill me before level 4. To add further insult to injury, I ran attack damage marks to make the bananas even more deadly, and those stray bananas have accidentally netted me more kills than I would care to count. Second, because of the power of the AD carry, that meant that if you could get ahead in the bottom lane, you could usually snowball to a victory. Even after assassins rose to prominence, Soraka was perfect for making the opponent think that they could do something as silly as try and kill my carry. Go ahead and jump into range. I just added 500 extra health and 100 extra armor to your target. I also hope you don't mind my company, or the company of my turret, because my silence is going to prevent you from using any escape spell. Now you're stuck in a situation where you either have to overcommit or try to back out, and the chances of survival in either choice aren't looking so good for you. Third, when climbing into and through silver, the early game is the most important aspect. Once you get into your gold promos and into gold itself though, the early game is evened up enough to where the late game starts to matter more. This throws players trying to get into gold into an issue they've never faced before climbing up the ladder, and is part of the reason why the promotion series into gold is so hard. Because of a lack of objective focus and unreliable follow-up due to everyone else trying to figure out all this late game stuff, it wasn't advantageous for me to play a tanky initiator. Even as I was climbing back through gold after the season reset, it didn't make sense for me to play tanky supports for the same reason, even though by all accounts they are definitely more powerful than they once were. Teamfights were chaotic and happened at every inopportune moment, much of it due to bad habits from playing in silver and bronze. Because of that lack of team coordination, I could instead use Soraka to smooth out the edges of a fight. I couldn't control it directly, but even if I tried to, there wasn't much I could control directly anyway. If someone went in too early, smooth over that issue by making them tankier. If someone got caught out, use your ult to buy enough time for a counter engage. The way that team fights were played out made it to where the champion with no crowd control was ironically the best option. 4. Because very few people actually played Soraka, she was a wild card. Since there were very few times in which you actually saw Soraka played, that meant that I could work with the element of surprise, dealing with you effectively because you had never seen someone play Soraka as a hyper-aggressive harass machine. By the time you figured out how I worked, I had the advantage and was pushing it in your face. Somewhat Smart is going to point out that I don't play her much anymore, and I can link that answer back to Perfect Imbalance. I may have found something innovating and exactly what I needed to get through gold, but after a while, I ran into people who didn't fall for the same tricks, and the issues with Soraka started to become more apparent, specifically her susceptibility to jungle pressure. It's not that she was a bad champion, but I was starting to struggle with her, and I wanted a change of pace. The direct control of the field is what I loved about support when I first joined, but with Soraka, I had to abandon that notion until I was high enough in the rank ladder that I could depend on my allies' ability to follow up with it. Once that happened, I looked around for someone who was similar to Soraka but had that direct control. Sona worked for a little bit, but she was horribly squishy, throwing me out of my comfort zone and not getting her big game-changing ultimate until level 6, which meant no crowd control for the early game except for a small slow. After unlocking Nami on a whim and finding out that I was really effective with her, I made her my new main champion, and she is the reason why I ended Plat 3 last season. Will I ever go back to Soraka? Maybe just for fun, but probably not in a competitive environment. My playstyle doesn't really work well with Soraka anymore. She got me through a rough spot when I needed her to, but now I've moved on to other things since then. The community's reaction to an item, game mechanic, champion, or pretty much anything can be just as important as how well balanced that element actually is, beyond just what Perfect Imbalance will tell you. To demonstrate this, take a look at any champion that saw very little play, but after a professional did very well with them, that champion became pick or ban status. Most of you who joined in Season 3 or 4 might not know about Malphite, but let me fill you in on him. In the Summer MLG tournament back in Season 2, Malphite saw some very impressive play in the professional scene. Back then, tanks were fairly powerful, and since Malphite's job is to completely counter anyone reliant on physical damage or auto attacks, he became pick or ban status for months afterward. Part of the reason I floundered in low elo was because I lost one of the champions that I was good with due to that ban. Since then, Malphite has only had one minor nerf applied to him, and now you seldom see him. It's not that he was turned into an abysmal champion with that nerf. In fact, before patch 4.7, the last balance change to him was in Season 2 with that minor nerf. Instead of becoming worse, the meta shifted from under him, and what people want out of a champion in the top lane changed. Yet, there is an even more extreme example, where a champion rose to popularity not because of a buff or nerf, or even heavy play from a professional, but from a skin. Again, anyone who was around in Season 2 will know who I'm talking about, but let me introduce the rest of you to Ezreal. When I joined the game in April of 2012, Ezreal was on the free week, and he's one of the first champions I loved to play and subsequently unlocked. He had elements of what I love from playing Diablo-style games, or just action RPGs in general. A long-range harass champion that beats on you from a distance. Since then, he has had a minor influence on what I love about the game, even though I seldom play him anymore outside of the once-a-month occasion I'm thrown into AD carry. When he was first released, he was genuinely overpowered. His Essence Flux, along with having an attack speed debuff, could also heal allies. The healing component was slowly nerfed over time until it was eventually removed, and at that point, people gave up on him. They thought he was bad, a waste of time, not worth the effort. You could find long forum posts as to why Ezreal needed a buff and why he was so terrible. When I joined, I was ridiculed for liking and playing Ezreal, even though I thought he was a fun champion with a lot of power. It wasn't until Pulsefire Ezreal came along that people saw him in a different light. Pulsefire Ezreal was the skin to own at the game, Riot's first attempt at a sci-fi skin, the first legacy skin, and was the skin that finally convinced me to spend money on the game. That skin raised a lot of interest in who Ezreal was, as do most skins that are released, but people came upon a realization with Ezreal. This champion is still overpowered. Remember that attack speed debuff I mentioned? Back when it had the healing component, it was fairly innocuous and didn't affect much, especially when Sivir could just nullify it with her ult. However, the attack speed debuff still remained, and was more powerful than anyone at first gave it credit for. That meant, not only was he a safe option for a backline carry, he could fight toe-to-toe with a hyper carry. Look back through the history of the game, and you will find a laundry list of champions who were thought to be bad but then came around to be good in their own right. Elise, Kennen, Jax, Kha'Zix, Jace, Zed, Nasus, and Corki are all examples of champions who had been considered unviable and yet saw popularity in heavy tournament usage at various points in Season 3, which usually led to greater or lesser nerfs on all of them. Even at whatever time you find this video, you can still see these trends in action. Sometimes a champion rises to prominence in one role because of popularity in another. At the beginning of Season 3, after the trio of bruiser junglers were nerfed, one of the main junglers was Nasus. He was decent at it, and was used primarily to exploit or counter the increased pressure created by a 2v1 lane, but over time his popularity decreased in the jungle. However, because there were now people who were better at Nasus and who better understood his unique strengths, he became a popular and successful pick in the top lane after the bully meta went away. As another example, we have Tryndamere, who was brought to popularity not for his obnoxious split push, but by a troll build. AP Tryndamere was brought into the spotlight, upon which Riot immediately destroyed it with a nerf, but again, that left a pool of players who were familiar with Tryndamere's mechanics, and who were now more capable of using AD Tryndamere to great effect. That led to a more carry-focused top lane, with Jax rising up later on as a result. On a similar vein, the rise of assassins can be partially traced to the power of the AD carry, but also to an early game trend where mid and top laners in a 2v1 situation, or with a bad early game overall, took 9 health potions into lane along with 2 sight wards, making any lane interaction against them meaningless. The reasoning behind that strategy was the same as with my old Soraka tactic: outlast the enemy rather than outdamage them. In order to curtail this, Riot limited the number of any one potion type you can take to 5, but that left players who were now better with champions like Kassadin and Katarina. Though Katarina fell back in popularity, Kassadin became ban status for months, and only after a heavy rework has finally conceded that ban status to other champions. Just because the community says something is good or bad does not mean that this is the case. Riot may be human, but so is the community. Riot may have a wall of statistics, but those statistics are based on a player base that is, by human nature, flawed. It isn't until we are demonstrated that something is viable by someone we respect that we actually turn around and start using some element or champion. Because of this, it's hard to know what is actually balanced and what isn't. Do you nerf this champion that everyone is complaining about because they actually are an issue? Or do you ignore the community, potentially damaging the player base as a result, and wait for them to inevitably start crying about the next trend? Not only is Riot aware that this happens, they have actively exploited it. If anyone remembers Elise when she was first put out there, the range on her repel was larger than the indicator itself, meaning even if you thought you've escaped, she just jumps back onto you. Later on, the way Riot phrased the range reduction suggested that this was an intentional imbalance they placed in her from the start. They knew it would take time for the player base to catch on to her and her toolkit, and it wasn't until the community finally did that they brought the range back to the appropriate level. But you don't have to take my word for it.
What are we changing here? Elise is an extremely challenging champion to play. When we designed her, we wanted to include a little additional range with Repel so that she could land on opponents just outside the targeting indicator. This was done to help players better access her power. Players got a lot better with Elise, and we no longer feel this additional range is necessary, so we're removing it. This should make Elise more consistent with her targeting indicators, so players will know what to expect when playing as Elise and against her.
As a more recent example, the first nerf to Feral Flare suggests that they intentionally made it a little too powerful to showcase how effective it can actually be. The values that are currently in the game are likely what should have been mathematically correct in the first place. What we find to be powerful and what we find to be weak is completely based on our perception of the game. I will be the first to admit that I am biased toward traditional defensive supports. So is the fact that I'm being successful with them a show that they actually are powerful? Or do people simply underestimate what strength I do have and fall behind because of that? I would like to believe that defensive supports are viable, but on an individual level, there is only so much validity I can bring to an idea. I completely disagreed with the community on Ezreal Pack in Season 2, and I disagree with their view on supports today. Time will tell as to whether I'm right or wrong, but even if the community thinks a certain way, I'm going to keep going forward with what I know works for me. This is also the same reason why the bronze player insta-locks a champion that might not be seen as very viable. That might be the only champion they know how to do well with, or have a good rune page for. Sure, they could go play the quote OP champs, but would they really perform better? Not necessarily. This also works in reverse. The reason why low-level summoners scream OP about champions who, for higher elo players, are obviously balanced, is because those champions, such as Master Yi and Garen, are very good at taking advantage of poor team coordination, ripping into you unless you know how to deal with them properly. After you see them a few too many times and start to notice the tendencies of the summoners that play them though, they become highly predictable and easier to deal with as a result. With that in mind, hopefully this will get you asking some questions. Why is it that you play whatever your favorite champion might be, and how does that champion interact with the current meta? Would it be a good idea to switch over to what's popular? Or is it a better idea to play what you're good at, knowing that the trend will eventually pass on? Is your pet peeve, the item or champion that you despise, actually overpowered? Or have you not found a proper way to deal with it yet? Finally, what are the gaps in our knowledge that hinder us in-game, and are we properly executing on the information that we do have? To those of you still here, thank you very much for watching and or listening. Please like and share this video if you got something from it, let me know what you think in the comments below, and best of luck on the fields of justice.